I stood in the ashes of what used to be my home, the smell of smoke still clinging to my hair and clothes. In my hands, I held a melted picture frame, the glass shattered, the faces inside warped by fire. It was the only thing I could save. My heart beat so fast it drowned out the silence of the ruins. 30 years of life gone in a single night. I called my son, David. My fingers trembled as I pressed his number. When he picked up, relief washed over me for a brief moment. He promised he would come. He said I could stay with him until I figured things out. I believed him. I wanted to believe that after everything I had endured, after all the sacrifices I made to raise him, he would be there for me. But when I arrived at his house, his wife Jessica opened the door. She looked at me as if I carried the smoke with me, as if I was a burden too heavy to let inside. Her smile was tight, her eyes sharp. She told me to leave my suitcase by the garage, that the smell might ruin the carpet. I swallowed my pride and did as she asked. David came down the stairs, perfectly dressed, his expensive watch glinting under the chandelier. He hugged me, but it was quick, distracted. That night, at dinner, Jessica spoke more than he did. She asked how long I planned on staying, her tone sweet but her meaning bitter. Within days, David sat me down in the living room. His voice was cold, rehearsed. He told me it wasn't his responsibility to house me, that I needed to find somewhere else. He said it almost as if he was repeating someone else's words. I knew immediately who had whispered them, his father, Bobby. I packed what little I had left and walked out of my son's house with tears burning my eyes. Soon after, I found myself at the downtown shelter, clutching that one suitcase like it carried the last piece of my dignity. Rows of cots, fluorescent lights, the smell of disinfectant mixed with despair. But none of that hurt as much as the truth that echoed inside me: my own son had abandoned me. And as I lay on that narrow cot, staring at the ceiling, one question kept haunting me. If this story is touching your heart, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. I would love to know where you're watching this from. How did my life come to this? At night, in the shelter's narrow cot, the thin blanket barely covering my body, I closed my eyes and tried to sleep. But memories had their own way of creeping in. They returned like shadows. Shadows of a life I had spent giving, enduring, surviving. I was 20 when I met Robert Sullivan. He was older, handsome in a dangerous way, with a confidence that pulled me in like a tide. People told me I was lucky he had chosen me. I believed them. I didn't see the warning signs, not until the ring was on my finger and the bruises began to bloom on my skin. At first, I told myself it was stress. A hard day at work, too many drinks, words that slipped out when he was angry. But it wasn't stress, it was who he was. The control, the fists, the way he looked at me like I was nothing more than a possession. And when I thought of leaving, when I gathered the courage, I remembered the child growing inside me. My David. I stayed. I told myself I had to protect him, give him a father, even if it meant swallowing my own dignity. I stayed through nights of silence broken by shouting, through mornings when I painted over the marks with makeup and forced a smile at the neighbors. I stayed because I believed that love meant sacrifice. There was someone else once, before Robert. Jamie Morrison. My first love. My college sweetheart. His laugh was easy, his hands gentle. We dreamed of a future together. But then I found out I was pregnant with Robert's child. I thought it was my duty, my responsibility to marry the father. So I let Jamie go. I let happiness go. After the divorce, when Robert finally walked away for a younger woman, I thought maybe freedom would feel sweet. But freedom came with bills stacked high, with 3 jobs at once, with calloused hands from scrubbing floors and sewing clothes late into the night. I remember the sound of the sewing machine more than I remember my own voice. The way the needle clattered against fabric as I stitched uniforms for other people's children while mine lay sleeping in the next room. Every coin I earned, every hour I worked, was for David. His education, his future, his chance to escape the shadow of his father. And I did it. I got him through school. I watched him graduate, suit pressed, smile wide. I thought maybe, finally, he would see me. Not just as the mother who provided, but as the woman who carried him through fire long before this last one. But now, years later, he looked at me like a stranger at his door. At the shelter, I found myself surrounded by others who carried stories like mine. There was a woman named Carla who used to run her own bakery until her husband gambled everything away. A man named Luis who had worked in construction until an accident left him with nothing. They became my family in those nights, each of us broken, each of us clinging to scraps of dignity. We shared stories over cheap coffee, sitting on metal chairs. And as I listened, I realized how many of us had sacrificed, how many of us had loved beyond measure, only to be abandoned. It was a comfort and a sorrow at once. Sometimes I caught myself touching the picture frame I had saved from the fire, my fingers tracing the warped glass. Inside was a photo of David at 10 years old, his arms wrapped around me, his smile so wide it lit up his whole face. I remembered how he used to slip his hand into mine when we crossed the street, how he would whisper, "Don't worry, Mama, I'll protect you." How did we get here? How did those small, tender promises turn into cold dismissal? One evening, the shelter held a small prayer circle. I wasn't sure I wanted to go, but something pulled me there. A soft voice asked if anyone wanted to share. My lips trembled, but I spoke. "I lost everything in a fire," I said. But the fire wasn't the hardest part. It was when my son turned me away. After everything I did, after all the years, he told me to find somewhere else. There was silence, then murmurs of sympathy. A woman beside me squeezed my hand. I felt tears press against my eyes, hot and unrelenting. And in that moment, I wasn't alone. For the first time in days, I wasn't invisible. Yet when the circle ended and the lights dimmed, the emptiness returned. I lay back on my cot, staring at the cracked ceiling, and wondered if all my sacrifices had been meaningless. The ghosts of my past walked with me everywhere. The bruises I hid, the dreams I buried, the nights I stayed awake stitching the future. They whispered in my ear that I had wasted my life, that no one remembered the price I had paid. But deep inside, another voice tried to rise. A quiet voice. The one that had carried me through every hardship. The one that said, "You are still here. You are still standing." And maybe, just maybe, the story wasn't over yet. I was sipping a bitter cup of shelter coffee when my old flip phone began to buzz. The sound startled me. It almost never rang anymore. For a moment, I thought it might be David, calling to apologize, to say he'd made a mistake. My heart leapt with hope. But when I opened it, the voice on the other end was not my son's. It was a voice from another lifetime. "Maggie? Is it really you?" My breath caught. Jamie. Jamie Morrison. The name itself opened a door to memories I had locked away for nearly 50 years. He had been my first love, the boy who had once walked me to class holding my hand, the man I thought I'd marry before my life was rerouted by Robert. Hearing his voice now, after all this time, sent a warmth through me I hadn't felt in decades, and with it, an ache for what might have been. He told me he'd heard about the fire through a mutual friend back in Oregon. He had been searching for me, desperate to know if I was safe. When I admitted where I was living, when I told him the truth, that I was homeless, he fell silent. I could hear his breath catch, the disbelief in his silence. "You're telling me your own son let this happen?" His voice shook with anger. "Maggie, after everything you gave him?" I wanted to defend David, to say he was confused, misled, pressured. But the truth sat heavy on my tongue. David had chosen to turn me away. Jamie's words came quickly then, like a flood. "I should have found you sooner. I should never have let you go. Listen to me, I want to help. Please don't say no." I gripped the phone tighter, my pride flaring. I had lived my whole life standing on my own 2 feet, even when they trembled under the weight of sacrifice. To accept help felt like admitting defeat. "Jamie, I can't. I don't want to be a burden." "You could never be a burden," he said softly. "Not to me." That night, I lay awake turning his words over in my mind. The years melted away in fragments. His laugh, the way he used to brush a strand of hair behind my ear, the letters he wrote when I broke things off. I had chosen Robert back then, thinking duty was stronger than love. Now, I wondered if that single decision had stolen decades from me. Days later, Jamie insisted on visiting. He showed up at the shelter, dressed simply in jeans and a sweater, though the car he arrived in revealed his success. He was a tech entrepreneur now, he explained, never married, never stopped thinking about me. He smiled when he saw me, but there was sadness in his eyes. You deserved so much better, he whispered, holding my hands. The shelter residents looked on, some whispering, others smiling at the unexpected reunion. For the first time since the fire, I felt like a woman again, not just a discarded mother. But with Jamie's arrival came new revelations. He had been following my life from a distance for years, quietly keeping track through mutual friends, always hoping our paths might cross again. He confessed that he knew about Robert, about the abuse, about the divorce. What he didn't know, what I had just begun to suspect, was that Robert had never truly let go of his hold on David. Before we continue, make sure to like this video and subscribe. With your support, we can keep bringing more stories that touch the heart. One evening, while Jamie and I shared coffee at a small diner near the shelter, I received a message on my phone. It was from a woman I didn't know well, someone who had once worked for Robert. She had overheard conversations between him and David. He tells your son that you exaggerate, the message read. That you were always dramatic, always trying to make him look bad. He twists the past. David believes him. My chest tightened as I read the words aloud. Jamie clenched his jaw, fury sparking in his eyes. So this is it. Robert has been poisoning him against you. That's why David could turn his back so easily. The pieces began to fall into place. The cold way David had repeated that it wasn't his responsibility. The dismissive tone, the detachment. They weren't just his words, they were Robert's echo. I remembered the years I had stayed silent to protect David, never telling him the full truth of what his father had done. I thought I was shielding him from pain. But in leaving the story untold, I had given Robert the power to rewrite it. And now, my son saw me not as the mother who bled for him, but as the villain in a narrative Robert controlled. The realization broke something in me. Not just anger but grief. Grief for the years wasted. Grief for the bond corrupted. Jamie reached across the table, covering my hands with his. Maggie, you can't fight this alone. Let me help you. Let me stand by your side. His voice was steady, and for the first time in years, I let myself believe that maybe I didn't have to carry the weight alone. Still, pride whispered in my ear. I had survived on my own for so long. Was it weakness now to lean on someone else? Or was it finally wisdom? Before I could answer, the diner television flickered with the evening news. The headline cut through the chatter, Robert Sullivan expands business empire. His face filled the screen, older now but still sharp, still powerful. My stomach turned at the sight. The man who had once broken me now stood as a pillar of success, his crimes buried beneath wealth and influence. Jamie's grip tightened. He's not untouchable. Not anymore. We'll find proof. We'll show David the truth. In that moment, I realized this was no longer just about survival. It was about reclaiming my story, exposing the lies, and finally confronting the man who had haunted me for decades. I looked at Jamie, at the man who had loved me before my life turned into ashes. And I whispered, almost to myself, maybe it's not too late. The ghosts of my past were rising, but so was something else, something fierce, something determined. For the first time since the fire, I felt a spark of hope. Jamie arrived at the shelter just after sunrise, fog hanging low over the parking lot like a curtain that hadn't decided whether to lift. He stepped out of the car with a thermos in his hand and a steady look in his eyes. I saw the way people glanced at him, then at me. Curiosity, kindness, a little hope passed from cot to cot like a folded note. He offered me the thermos. Coffee, strong and hot. My hands wrapped around the heat as if it were proof that the world still had warmth in it. I told him I wasn't ready for scenes. He smiled sadly and said the scene had already found us. A girl at the front desk had posted a short clip of our reunion on her social media. A mother in a shelter. A man who looked at her like she mattered. The views climbed, then multiplied. Comments bloomed in directions I couldn't control. Strangers writing, "Stay strong, mama." Others asking where the son was who had turned me away. And then, inevitably, someone tagged David. I wanted to crawl back inside the thin blanket and pretend the internet couldn't find me. But Jamie's voice was calm. Let them see you, Maggie. Let them see the truth you've carried in silence. By midday, my phone buzzed with David's name. I steadied my breath and answered. His voice was tight, threaded with embarrassment. He said I was making a spectacle. He said this was private family business. He said I needed to meet him at the house so we could resolve it quietly. I told him I would meet him, but I wouldn't be alone. Sarah met us at her office first. Warm lights, shelves of law books, a square of sunlight on the carpet. She had a folder on her desk and a softness in her voice that didn't dilute its strength. We will do this on your terms, she said. You speak first. You set the ground. I nodded, though inside I was trembling. I had spent decades arranging my life so no one would see the chaos behind the door. Now I would open it in broad daylight. We drove to David's neighborhood. The pavement looked polished. The hedges were trimmed into obedient shapes. When we pulled up, the house stood like a perfectly ironed shirt. I could barely feel my legs as I walked to the door. Jessica opened it with the brittle grace of crystal about to crack. She took in Sarah's briefcase, Jamie's steady posture, my small suitcase with the melted photograph inside. Her eyes flicked toward the street, checking for witnesses. David appeared in the entryway. His jaw was set. He asked what all this was. He asked why I couldn't handle things without dragging outsiders into our family. Because I did that for 40 years, I said. And look where it brought us. We sat in the living room beneath the chandelier that reflected 100 small versions of our faces. Jamie stood behind me, not looming, just there. Like a lighthouse notices the ship without telling it how to steer. Sarah placed the folder on the coffee table and folded her hands. David began with apologies that weren't apologies. He said he was sorry about the timing, about the stress, about the optics. He said he had intended to help me find a long-term solution, just not at his home. He used words like responsible and adult and sustainable, as if I were a project that had overrun its budget. Jessica added that the smell of smoke had been difficult, that the neighbors had sensitive allergies, that their homeowners association had rules. Her voice never rose, but her eyes were knives. I listened. I let the words arrange themselves in tidy rows. Then I pushed in my chair and stood. When you were 10, I said to David, your father slammed a door so hard the picture on the wall fell and shattered. You swept it up with your small hands before I could stop you. You told me not to cry. You said you would protect me. He looked away, as if the floor had developed an interesting pattern. I told him I had kept quiet about many things. That I had painted over bruises with makeup and with silence. That I had slept with my body curled around fear so his sleep could be soft. That I had turned my back on love because I thought duty would save us. And that it had not. Sarah opened the folder. Paper made its patient sounds. Old hospital records, Polaroids with dates scrawled in the corner, a copy of a police report I had never filed all the way because I lost courage at the desk and walked home with my heart in my mouth. A letter from a neighbor who remembered the nights. David's face changed. Not all at once. In increments. A corner of certainty loosened, then another. I watched the story he'd been fed begin to stutter. He said, Mom, why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted you to have a father, I said. Because I thought if I carried the weight, you could run further. The front door opened again. The air shifted. I knew the shape of his presence before I saw him. Robert walked in like a veteran of every room, tie straight, smile thin, the new wedding ring catching light like a dare. He said he had come to mediate, since clearly I had escalated things. He said it with a voice that once made my bones want to vanish. Jamie stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. He told Robert this was not his house, not his meeting. Robert laughed, soft, dismissive. He called Jamie by his last name as if they were negotiating a merger. Sarah stood. Her calm rearranged the air. She said we were here to clarify the past and discuss my housing, and that any further manipulation or intimidation would be documented. She said the word documented with a precision that wiped the smile from Robert's face. He looked at me then, the way a man looks at a wall he once punched and expects to find the dent still there. Maggie, he said, you've always been dramatic. Always rewriting history to make yourself the heroine. I felt the old tremor in my hands, the one that warned me to fold, to retreat, to apologize for taking up space. But another feeling rose under it, older than fear, stubborn as a root. I picked up one of the photos. It was my forearm, mottled purple, dated in my handwriting. I placed it gently in front of David. Then I laid down the ER bill with the diagnosis circled. Then a note the school counselor had written when David began coming to class tired, quiet, small. The room changed shape. David pressed his fingers to his eyes. His voice sounded younger. He asked his father if it was true. Robert threw out words like misunderstandings and mutual conflicts and the stress of youth. He said I had always had a flair for martyrdom. Something in me broke but didn't shatter. It broke like a shell breaks so something can push out. I told him I had forgiven him once, twice, 100 times in the dark. I told him I had paid our rent with knees on kitchen tiles scrubbing away the evidence of his temper. I told him I would not scrub anymore. Robert's voice rose. The mask frayed. He called me ungrateful. He said he had supported David, paid for opportunities, guided him toward success. He said a mother who really loved her son would know when to step aside instead of embarrassing him. That word, embarrassing, landed like a slap aimed past me to the boy he had trained to flinch. Jamie stepped to my side. Not in front of me, beside me. He said, "We're done with your version. Maggie is speaking now." I looked at David. I saw in him the boy who had once collected shattered glass in a dustpan with his small hands. I told him I would not fight him for love that did not want to stand. I told him I was asking for truth, not performance. He turned to his father and asked, the way a man asks a mirror to confess, "Did you tell me Mom exaggerates? Did you tell me she lies?" Robert's eyes flicked, a microsecond, but I caught it. The rehearsed innocence stumbled. He said he had only tried to give perspective. He said he had tried to keep the family from airing laundry in public. Public, I said softly. Like the nights the neighbors heard. Like the ER intake log. Like the time I wore long sleeves in July. And your mother asked me at the church potluck if I was cold. Silence, thick as wool. Sarah slid another document forward. A copy of a voicemail transcription Robert had left years ago, his voice slurred, the threats mean and childish and unmistakable. She had retrieved it from an old phone backup. She let the paper sit between us like a stone in a river, changing the current around it. Jessica stood abruptly, a hand over her mouth. She said she needed air and fled to the kitchen. David sank onto the edge of the sofa, elbows on knees, face in hands. He began to speak. Stops, starts, a man learning a new alphabet in the middle of a sentence. He said he didn't know. He said he hadn't wanted to know. He said it was easier to believe the version that didn't require him to unlearn his father. Then he looked at me. His eyes were rimmed in red. He asked what I needed. I felt the answer rise and surprise me with its clarity. I need a home, I said. Not a place to sleep, those exist. A home where my dignity is not a guest with an expiration date. And I need you to stop letting him write me out of your story. Robert scoffed. He said I was manipulating David, turning him against blood. The old irony of it almost made me laugh. Sarah spoke again. Calm, firm. She outlined options, restraining order if needed, a formal statement for the record, potential civil remedies if past debts and damages were relevant. She said there were shelters, yes, but also options for immediate transitional housing while we pursued something permanent. She said Jamie was willing to sponsor that transition. David flinched at Jamie's name as if pride had pricked him. He glanced at the window, then at his father, then at me. The conflict writ his whole body. He said he wanted to fix it. He said I could come back to the house while we figured things out, at least for a while. I listened to the offer hang in the air like a coat that didn't fit. I thought of the garage where Jessica had asked me to leave my suitcase. I thought of the way a welcome can be a leash if it comes without respect. No, I said gently. Thank you. Not like this. The room startled, some with relief, some with offense. A choice is always a small earthquake. Robert laughed again, brittle. He said I was ungrateful to the end. He said I was choosing some old flame over my own son. He said I was proving his point. I turned toward him with a steadiness I didn't recognize as mine and yet had been growing in me all along. I told him I was choosing a life where my worth was not a line item in a ledger he balanced. I told him I was choosing to stop disappearing. David stood. He didn't move toward me or away. He moved inward, I think. He said he needed time. He said he needed to speak to a therapist. He said he would like to see those records again, and more, and hear the truth from someone other than his father. He said, "Mom, I don't know how to be different yet, but I want to try." I nodded. Trying is an honest verb. Robert snapped that this was absurd. He told David to come with him, that they would discuss this like men. David didn't move. Somewhere between us, a thread refused to snap or splice. It simply vibrated with a new, uncertain music. Jessica returned from the kitchen with damp eyes and a tight jaw. She said she would pack a guest room if I insisted on staying. I told her I would not stay. Not today. We gathered our papers. I picked up my melted photo frame and slid it into my bag. My hands no longer shook. At the door, I turned back. The chandelier scattered our images into 100 fragments, none of them the whole truth. I said to all of them and to myself, I am done pleading for the right to exist in my own life. Outside, the sun had edged the hedges in gold. The air smelled like cut grass and something new. Jamie asked me quietly what I wanted now. Not what anyone expected. What I wanted. I looked down at my hands, calloused yes but steady. I told him I wanted to go somewhere that didn't apologize for light. Somewhere I could plant something and believe it would live. I told him I was ready to accept help, not as charity, but as partnership. I told him I was tired of surviving politely. He nodded. Then say yes, he said. Say yes, Maggie. I breathed in. The breath felt like the first one after a long dive, lungs burning, eyes open underwater at last. Yes, I said. Behind us, a curtain shifted. Somewhere, a phone camera had surely caught some piece of this. Let it. Let the story walk out where air could reach it. But even as we stepped off the porch, the old fear came to test the edges of my courage. It whispered about backlash, about isolation, about mistakes. It asked if I was sure. No, I said to the fear inside me. I am not sure. But I am done being silent. We reached the car. I placed the suitcase in the trunk, the small warped photo on my lap. In it, a boy grinned at a mother who still believed promises were unbreakable. I touched the glass and felt something like a blessing pass between past and present. As Jamie started the engine, my phone buzzed. A message from David. It was short. I'm going to therapy this week. Will you meet with me after? I typed with careful fingers. Yes. On my terms. The car rolled forward, the house shrinking in the rearview until it was only geometry and memory. Ahead, the road curved toward a sky that finally looked wide enough. Everything could still go wrong, I knew that. Money makes shadows long. Old habits grip like vines. But there was a kind of risk that wasn't annihilation, it was arrival. I rested my palm on the warm dash and whispered to the woman I had been, we're almost there. Stay with me. The first snow had melted when Jamie drove me up the mountain road. Pines combed the sky, the lake held a quiet mirror. I pressed my palm to the window and let the water keep the morning like a breath. Inside, the house smelled of cedar and fresh bread. Jamie had been learning to bake. He said it calmed his thoughts. I set my melted picture frame on the mantel, no longer ashamed of its warped glass. It was proof that I had walked through fire and carried love out with me. That first week I slept without jolting awake. No doors slamming in memory. Just the whisper of the fireplace and the small noises of a home that wanted us there. Days widened. We found a rhythm. Jamie worked from a table facing the trees. I made tea at noon and we stood in the doorway, counting the geese. Sarah called often. She had filed paperwork and preserved records in careful order. She didn't push me toward court. She prepared me for it if it came. Justice, she said, can be many rooms. You choose which one you enter. I chose a room with chairs in a circle. We started a support group in the church basement. A pot of coffee that tasted like courage. Women came quietly. I brought a small tin of seeds and set it in the center of the table. Not for show, I said. For reminders. We spoke around the edges until edges softened. Carla returned to say she had opened a weekend stall. Teresa found a lawyer and her own voice in the same week. We learned that telling the story did not make it bigger, it made us bigger than it. Word reached David. He called, then visited. The drive up the mountain put a hush on him. He said therapy felt like cleaning an attic. Dust everywhere, old boxes, letters that changed the past simply by being read. We walked by the lake. He asked me to tell him again, not the polished version, the human one. I told him about the night I hid in the bathroom with him sleeping on my chest and counted tiles to stay awake. I told him how quiet can be a weapon. I told him that forgiving his father had been my way of surviving, not an absolution of harm. He cried then. He asked if I would let him try again. I said yes, with boundaries. Yes, with respect as the hinge. Yes, with doorframes built for two-way trust. We set small practices. A weekly call. A visit with no conditions. Honesty that didn't swing like a hammer. When spring came, I planted. Jamie turned the soil beside the deck. We built raised beds and laid stone paths. I pressed seeds into the earth while the light leaned late. Lettuce, tomatoes, marigolds. A rosebush for my mother. A row of lavender for sleep. Each morning I stepped outside with my tea and listened. The garden spoke in small green syllables. I learned its grammar, patience, attention, hands willing to get dirty. Robert tried to contact me twice. Once with an email repeating his script about perception and family image. Once through an acquaintance who hinted at reconciliation if I behaved. I forwarded both to Sarah and then put my phone down like a door. Not every knock deserved opening. We did not go to court. Not then. The truth had been documented. That mattered. But the justice I needed most was not a sentence under fluorescent lights. It was a sentence I could finally say without stuttering. I am not the woman he said I was. On a Sunday in June, we held a small gathering by the lake. The group from the church came. Sarah brought lemon bars. Jamie set out quilts on the grass. David arrived late, carrying a clumsy bouquet. He hugged me, not carefully but fully. We stood in a loose circle and passed the tin of seeds. Everyone took a pinch. Plant where you stand, I said. Even if it's only one pot on a windowsill. Even if it's one brave sprout. Later, David and I sat on the dock with our shoes off. He asked about Jamie. I told him the truth, that loving someone gentle after a life of surviving can feel like learning to breathe slowly again. At sunset, the lake took the sky until we couldn't tell which held which. I felt quiet settle in my bones, not as emptiness, but as space. Months turned. The garden rose. I learned the birds by their morning arguments. I replaced the melted photo with a new one, David and me in the doorway, sunlight on our faces, a shadow behind us that belonged to no one. I kept the old photo too. I set it beside the seeds. Survival is not a single miracle. It is a series of small refusals to go back. On the first cool night of autumn, Jamie lit a fire. We sat on the rug and ate apples from a neighbor. I told him I felt like a house renovated without losing its foundation. He smiled and said he liked this architecture. Before bed, I stepped onto the deck and looked at the garden glowing faintly in the moonlight. Leaves talking in their sleep. The lavender exhaling. Somewhere a fox yipped. I placed my hand on the rail and thanked the woman who kept walking, the girl who kept hoping, and the mother who kept loving even when it hurt. Justice did not arrive with trumpets. It arrived like water through soil, slow, insistent, life-making. For me, finally, dignity returned and asked for nothing but upkeep. Love came back older, steadier, unafraid of silence. I went inside, turned out the lights, and left one candle burning in the kitchen. If this story moved you, click on the next video that's appearing on the screen now.